I never asked to be here. 3 times I've stood beneath the cold gaze of the moon. 3 times I've waited for her blessing. And 3 times I've been cast aside. The whispers say I am cursed, wolfless, unworthy of love. Perhaps they are right. Each rejection has carved a wound deeper than the last. Until I no longer bleed, I simply break in silence. And yet, the alpha demands my presence again. Duty forces me to walk into the fire of mockery, into a fate already written in the eyes of my pack. I tell myself I can endure it one last time, but I was wrong. Because on the night of my third rejection, when my world finally shattered, the most powerful creature alive stepped from the shadows, and with a single claim, he changed my destiny forever. The moon hung heavy and watchful above the Bloodfang Pack's sacred grounds, a pale silver eye that saw too much. The ceremony fires burned low, their orange glow throwing long shadows across the gathering circle. Every wolf in the pack was present, dressed in silks and polished armor, faces lit with eager anticipation. Tonight, destinies would be decided. Fated bonds would be revealed. New unions celebrated. The air buzzed with tension, hope, and excitement. At least, for everyone but one girl. Lynda stood at the very edge of the circle, her arms pressed tightly to her sides, her breathing shallow. Her dress, a simple cream gown borrowed from an elder who pitied her, looked almost out of place among the glittering silks of the other hopefuls. She tugged the sleeves nervously, though it did little to make her feel less exposed. Each step she had taken to reach this place had been a battle, not against the physical journey, but against the ache in her heart. She had walked this path before, twice. Both times had ended in rejection so sharp and public that the wounds had never healed, and now she had been forced to stand here again. Alpha Tauren had decreed it. All unmated wolves must attend the ceremony of fate. It was the law of their pack, one Lynda dared not disobey. Her protests had been ignored, her pleas dismissed. Even her mother's old friend, who had tried to shield her, could not change the Alpha's command. And so here she was, trembling beneath the unyielding gaze of the moon, about to be broken a third time. The murmurs had started the moment she entered the circle. She's back again. Doesn't she know she's cursed? Wolfless, thrice rejected. What kind of wolf even is she? The whispers were not whispers. They were daggers, sharpened to pierce her skin, her spirit, her pride. A group of young she-wolves near the front giggled behind their hands, their eyes darting toward her with open mockery. Lynda felt their scorn pressing against her like a physical weight, and for a moment she wanted to run, to flee into the forest, never to return. But her legs stayed rooted, stiff with fear and defiance. At the center of the circle, Daemon Tauren stood tall. Golden-haired, broad-shouldered, his presence commanded attention. The Alpha Son, heir to the Bloodfang Pack, and once, the boy who had shattered her. He had rejected her 2 years ago with words that still haunted her every sleepless night. She had prayed never to stand before him again, yet fate, or cruelty, had led her back to him. The moonstone altar shimmered faintly, glowing as each pair of mates was revealed. Cheers erupted as bonds were forged. Couples embraced, packs celebrated. The atmosphere was charged with joy, until her name was called. Lynda. The elder's voice cut through the laughter. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Every eye turned toward her. Lynda felt her knees weaken, but she stepped forward. Each movement felt like walking into fire. She kept her chin low, unable to meet Daemon's gaze until she reached the center. Only then did she dare to look up. His eyes, cold, blue, and merciless, met hers. For one fleeting heartbeat, she felt it. The spark of recognition, the faint tug of the mate bond that should have been her salvation. But Daemon's lips curved, not into a smile, but a sneer.
"The moon goddess must be mocking me," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lynda's heart clenched. Her fingers trembled. Damon stepped closer, tilting his head, his words sharpened for her alone. "Still you stand here hoping? Still you dream of a bond you'll never have?" Lynda flinched, as if struck. Around them, the whispers grew crueler. Cursed, wolfless, unwanted. "I, Damon Torin," he announced, his voice carrying across the circle, "reject you, Lynda, for the third and final time." The bond between them snapped like brittle glass. A searing pain shot through her chest, tearing her from the inside out. She staggered, her knees threatening to buckle. Laughter rose from the crowd, cruel and unrelenting. Damon's smirk lingered as if he had just crushed a pest under his heel. Lynda's vision blurred with unshed tears. She lowered her head, swallowing the scream clawing at her throat. The rejection echoed through her soul, a brand that marked her forever. Thrice rejected. The moon above bore witness to her breaking, and yet for reasons she could not understand, it did not look away.
The laughter would not stop. It rolled through the crowd like thunder, wave upon wave of mockery crashing against Lynda until she thought she might drown in it. Everywhere she looked, mouths twisted in cruel delight, eyes sparkled with scorn. Some clutched their sides as if her misery was the greatest entertainment they had ever witnessed. Others whispered behind raised hands, their words venomous but loud enough to pierce her ears. "Thrice rejected! What a disgrace! Surely she should be cast out! The moon goddess has cursed her! No wolf like that should remain among us!" Her body trembled. She pressed her fists against her gown, nails biting into her palms. She would not cry, not here, not before them, but her chest ached as if Damon's rejection had hollowed her out completely, leaving only the echo of his cruel words. Damon himself looked triumphant, basking in the approval of the pack. He stood tall, his smirk wide, his hand raised as though he were a victor on the battlefield. To him, she was not a woman, not a soul, not even a wolf. She was simply the pack's spectacle, a reminder of failure. "Unwanted forever," someone jeered from the crowd. "Even the moon goddess has abandoned her." The words stung worse than any blade. Lynda bit down hard on her lip, tasting blood. Her vision swam. She thought of running, back to her small, crumbling cottage at the farthest edge of the packlands, back to solitude where only the walls mocked her. But her legs would not move. She stood frozen at the center of the circle, their jeers holding her like chains. And then, everything changed. The air shifted first, heavy and electric, as if the world itself had drawn a sharp breath. The laughter faltered. One by one, voices fell silent. A strange stillness swept across the grounds, settling over the pack like a suffocating blanket. Even the firelight seemed to dim, shadows stretching unnaturally long. Lynda felt it before she saw him. A presence, powerful, vast, and unrelenting. It pressed down on her shoulders like invisible weight, stealing her breath. The hairs at the back of her neck rose, and her wolf, though faint and often silent, stirred deep within her as if startled awake. Then he appeared. Through the parted crowd, a tall figure strode forward, his steps unhurried yet commanding. His very presence seemed to part the air, forcing others to bow their heads instinctively. Broad-shouldered, draped in a black cloak that swayed with his movements, his aura shimmered like raw fire. Eyes the color of storm-tossed steel swept across the gathering, and no one dared to meet them. The Lycan King. Elijah. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some fell to their knees at once, unable to withstand the sheer force of his aura. Others bent their heads trembling. Even Alpha Torin, proud and ruthless, lowered himself with a stiffness that revealed more fear than respect. But Elijah's gaze was not on them. It was on her. Lynda's breath caught in her throat. Those piercing eyes locked onto her as if she were the only soul in the world. She wanted to shrink beneath the weight of them, to hide from the storm she saw in them, but she could not look away. He was terrifying, every inch the ruthless monarch whispered about in fearful tales. And yet, in his gaze, she saw something else, something sharp, searching, unyielding. Elijah stepped closer. The crowd parted in silence, bowing their heads, but none dared to speak. His boots struck the stone with steady precision, each sound echoing like a heartbeat in the suffocating quiet. He stopped before her, towering, the cloak settling around him like the wings of a shadowed beast. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched until Lynda's knees threatened to give way under the weight of it. She lowered her head, ashamed, waiting for his judgment, another rejection, perhaps harsher than Damon's. But Elijah's voice when it came was deep, resonant, and absolute. Enough. The single word rolled across the gathering, and wolves flinched as though struck. The air thickened, heavy with dominance. Even Damon, so proud and cruel a moment ago, faltered and stepped back. Elijah's gaze flicked briefly to the air. You mock the gifts of the moon goddess as though they are yours to scorn. His voice was low, dangerous, a blade sheathed in ice. Foolish child. Damon's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His bravado melted beneath the king's aura. Then Elijah looked at her again, at Lynda, trembling, broken, humiliated beyond measure. His eyes softened, only slightly, but enough for her to notice, enough to unsteady her further. He reached forward. A hand, strong and unyielding, lifted her chin until her gaze met his. Her heart thundered painfully in her chest, and for a moment she thought she might faint under the sheer force of his presence. This one, Elijah declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the grounds, is mine. Gasps erupted, but no one dared to speak. The words struck like lightning, silencing all. Damon's face twisted with disbelief, the alphas with barely contained shock. The entire pack seemed frozen in place, unable to process what they had just heard. I claim her, Elijah continued, his voice steady and commanding, as my mate, as my Luna. Before the moon and before all of you, she belongs to me. Lynda's knits parted, but no sound came out. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. She could barely comprehend the weight of his words. Her, the thrice rejected Omega, claimed by the Lycan King himself? Disbelief warred with fear, and fear warred with something else, something warm and unfamiliar that flickered in her chest like the first spark of fire. Around them, the silence was absolute. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The humiliation that had moments ago drowned her was gone, replaced with stunned stillness. The mocking voices had been silenced, not by pity, but by power, by Elijah. And though her heart trembled with uncertainty, Lynda knew one truth had been written that night under the watching moon. Her life would never be the same.
The words still echoed inside Lynda's mind like the toll of a great bell. I claim her as my Luna. Even as the Lycan King's hand released her chin, even as his gaze shifted away from her trembling form, the weight of his declaration pressed into her chest. She could not breathe. She could not move. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she was left swaying in disbelief. Around them, silence hung heavy, but not for long. A murmur began at the edges of the circle, low at first, then rising. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps to outrage. Wolves looked at each other with wide eyes, mouths twisted in shock. The tension cracked like glass under strain until the voices broke free. "This cannot be," someone barked. "She's wolfless," a woman shrieked. "Unworthy, she'll shame the crown." The noise swelled like a storm, wolves stumbling over each other in disbelief and anger. It was not just shock, it was defiance. Outrage at the thought that a thrice-rejected, cursed Omega could be lifted to the highest place a she-wolf could stand. Alpha Tauren pushed forward, his broad shoulders tense, his jaw clenched tight. He bent his head toward Elijah, though the submission looked forced, grudging. His voice trembled with something between respect and desperation. "My king," he began carefully, "surely this is a jest. That girl is no Luna. She is wolfless, thrice rejected. The pack would not—" The words died on his tongue. Elijah's eyes, sharp as blades, turned to him. The Lycan King did not speak, but his aura surged like a tidal wave, slamming into every wolf present. Torrhen staggered back a step, his body betraying him even as he clenched his fists in fury. "It is no jest," Elijah said, his tone quiet but absolute. "Do you challenge my claim?" The Alpha bowed his head at once, sweat glistening at his temple. "Of course not, my king. Then hold your tongue," Elijah cut him off. Lynda watched, wide-eyed, as the alpha of her pack, who had ruled her life with fear and cruelty, was silenced like a child before this man. She should have felt satisfaction, she should have felt relief, but all she felt was dread, coiled tight inside her stomach. The pack's outrage had not subsided. The whispers spread like wildfire. Some wolves looked at her with outright hatred, others with pity. A few lowered their eyes in reluctant obedience to their king, but the disbelief lingered. "Why me?" Lynda thought, her chest aching. "Why claim me? What could the king want with someone like me?" Daemon's face twisted with fury. He stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing. "You can't be serious. She is nothing, a disgrace. She is—" He choked on his words as Elijah turned to him. The king did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His aura lashed out like a whip, striking Daemon so hard the young heir stumbled backward, his knees buckling. Sweat poured down his brow, his breaths shallow. Elijah's eyes glowed faintly, the promise of violence simmering just beneath the surface. "Do not speak of my mate again," Elijah said coldly. The entire gathering froze. Daemon lowered his gaze, trembling, his lips tight to stifle further protest. And then Elijah turned, his cloak sweeping behind him as he reached for him. She stiffened as his hand closed firmly around her wrist. Heat shot up her arm, startling her, and she tried to pull back on instinct. But his grip was unyielding, though not cruel. His voice, when he spoke to her alone, was softer than before. Still deep, still commanding, but not meant for the crowd. "You do not belong here any longer." Her breath hitched. She looked around the pack, the wolves who had mocked her since childhood, the ones who had jeered at her rejections, the alpha who had forced her to stand before them time and again, their faces blurred, twisted with disbelief and rage. And suddenly, she knew. This was the end. Elijah did not give them time to protest further. He pulled her gently but firmly towards him, and then faced the crowd once more. "From this moment," he declared, his voice echoing across the sacred grounds, "she is no longer of the Bloodfang pack. She is mine. She is under my protection, under my crown. Should any of you seek to touch her, to harm her, to defy this claim, you defy your king." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared to speak. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Wolves bowed their heads, some reluctantly, some trembling with barely restrained rage. Lynda's heart hammered wildly in her chest. She could not comprehend what was happening. One moment she had been drowning in humiliation, her life shattered beyond repair, and now she was being pulled away from the ashes of her old life by the most powerful wolf in existence. Elijah's soldiers stepped forward from the shadows of the tree line, their presence a reminder that the king's will was absolute. Cloaked and armed, they moved like a single unit, their expressions unreadable, their dominance pressing heavy on the pack. "Come," Elijah said simply, his hand still around her wrist. She stumbled as he guided her away from the circle. Each step felt heavier than the last. She looked back once, her eyes meeting the faces of her pack. Some glared, some sneered, some looked away in submission. Daemon's hatred burned like fire, his fists clenched, his chest rising and falling with fury. Alpha Torrhen's expression was carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed a dangerous promise. And as Lynda turned away, following Elijah into the night, she knew what she was leaving behind. A lifetime of scorn, of loneliness, of humiliation, but also everything she had ever known. The ashes of her old life lay behind her. What waited ahead, she could not yet imagine.
The forest no longer looked the same when Lynda traveled through it under the escort of the Lycan King's warriors. She had walked these paths before, gathering herbs for her duties as an Omega healer, but tonight the familiar trees seemed to bend away from her, as if even nature recognized the shift in her fate. Behind her, the Bloodfang pack stood in silence. Their eyes still burned with contempt, but they dared not move under Elijah's command. The weight of his authority lingered like smoke across the clearing. Even the proud Alpha Tauren kept his head bowed, fists clenched but helpless. Lynda's pulse thundered in her ears as she took each step away from them, away from the jeers, away from Damon's cruel rejection. For years she had longed to escape their scorn, and yet now that freedom was hers, it did not feel like release. It felt like exile. Her gaze flicked sideways to Elijah, towering and silent as he walked ahead, his dark cloak rippling like shadow. Every movement of his bore quiet menace, his presence so overwhelming that even the air seemed reluctant to brush against him. He hadn't spoken to her since the ceremony, not one word since he had claimed her before all. Why me? The question gnawed at her, sharp and relentless. Why had the Lycan King chosen her, of all people, a thrice rejected Omega with no wolf? Was she simply a pawn in some game of power? The march stretched into hours. The forest path gave way to an open plain where the full might of the king's retinue revealed itself. Dozens of Lycan warriors, their armor etched with runes of the old bloodlines, waited astride massive black steeds. The sight stole Lynda's breath. She had heard stories of the king's guard, of their ruthlessness, of how entire packs submitted at the mere sight of them. But seeing them now, disciplined, sharp-eyed, their heads bowing only to Elijah, made those tales pale in comparison. One warrior guided a second horse toward her. "My lady," he said gruffly, bowing as he extended the reins. Lynda blinked at the title. No one had ever addressed her with respect before. She hesitated, unsure if this was meant in mockery, but the soldier's face was carved from stone. Reluctantly, she mounted, her fingers trembling against the reins. The column began its march toward the king's realm, the sound of hoofs drumming against the earth like thunder. Lynda's body rocked with the rhythm, but her mind churned faster than any gallop. When she dared glance at Elijah again, his eyes flicked toward her, just briefly, like a blade catching moonlight. She shivered. Hours later, the silence cracked. "You think I chose you out of pity?" Elijah said suddenly, his voice deep and cutting through the night air. He did not look at her, but his words struck her squarely. Lynda stiffened. She faltered. "Why else would you? I'm nothing. Less than nothing." His gaze snapped to hers then, and she nearly flinched from its intensity. "You are mine," he said, his tone like a vow, like thunder rolling over mountains. "And nothing that is mine is nothing." The words tangled inside her chest, a knot of disbelief and strange warmth. But doubt rose sharper still. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am, or what I lack." A dangerous smile ghosted across his lips. "I know enough." Her throat tightened. Part of her wanted to press further, to demand why, to demand what he saw in her. But fear held her tongue. His presence was too vast, too heavy, as though challenging him directly might crush her.
The silence stretched again. Later, when the company stopped to rest beside a riverbank, the warriors kept their distance, posting watch without needing command. Elijah remained apart as well, his figure a dark silhouette against the firelight. Lynda sat alone on a fallen log, her cloak pulled tight around her as the chill seeped in. Her thoughts circled endlessly, grief for what she had lost, fear for what awaited, and confusion over the man who had upended her fate with a single claim. Then, unexpectedly, he approached. She braced herself, her shoulders tensing. Without a word, Elijah draped a heavier cloak across her shoulders. The fur-lined warmth enveloped her instantly. She blinked at him, startled. "You will freeze if you sit there shaking," he said simply, his tone neither harsh nor gentle, but firm, matter-of-fact. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. It wasn't kindness exactly, not the soft, nurturing kind she had always imagined love to be, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a small act that said he had noticed her suffering. She met his gaze, her lips parting, but no words came. Elijah straightened, his eyes unreadable in the firelight's glow. "Rest. Tomorrow you ride into a world far greater than you've known. You will need strength." And then he turned, leaving her wrapped in his cloak, her heart pounding with confusion. Lynda stared after him long into the night. She had expected cruelty, indifference, perhaps even regret for choosing her. Instead, he left her with something far more dangerous: hope.
The palace loomed before her like something pulled from a legend. Massive spires speared the sky, their tips catching the morning sun until they gleamed like blades of fire. The outer walls, veined with silver and carved with the marks of ancient lichens, radiated a silent power that made Lynda's chest tighten. Compared to the crumbling stone halls of the Bloodfang Pack, this place was not merely a stronghold, it was a living testament to dominance. She sat stiffly on the horse, her back aching from the long ride, her hands still clutching Elijah's heavy cloak around her shoulders. As the gate swung open with a deep groan, she felt her heart hammering louder than the sound of hoofs on marble. The courtyard stretched wide, paved with polished stone that reflected the sunlight glass. Already, nobles lined the steps, their robes shimmering with fine embroidery, jewels glinting at their throats. Men and women who carried themselves as though every breath they took was owed respect. Their eyes followed Elijah as he dismounted, and like a tide rolling in, they all bent low, bowing with perfect synchronicity. "Your Majesty," they chorused. The sound rolled like thunder through the air, and yet not a single voice had been raised for her. When Elijah turned toward her, offering no assistance, Lynda realized she would have to dismount on her own. Her legs trembled, threatening to give way, but she gritted her teeth and slid down. Her boots met the marble with a sharp tap. The sound carried further than she expected, echoing faintly and drawing every gaze to her. The whispers started immediately. "Is that an Omega? Surely he jests. Where is her wolf?" Each word pierced sharper than a knife. She had thought herself numbed after the ceremony, after Damon's cruel rejection, but the sting of scorn from these strangers cut deeper in a different way. They did not even know her name, yet already they had decided she was unworthy. A soft laugh drifted from the front of the assembly. A woman stepped forward, her every motion deliberate, graceful, practiced to perfection. Her gown shimmered with golden silk, clinging to her form in a way that made her look both regal and dangerous. Her hair spilled in waves of honey down her back, and her lips curved into a smile that was far too kind to be kind. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing low. Her voice was smooth, like wine poured over glass. "We are honored to welcome you home." Her eyes flicked to Lynda, a brief glance, as though cataloging her flaws. Lynda's stomach twisted. The word guest was deliberate.
stripping her of any claim Elijah had placed on her. The king's voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. "Not a guest. This is Lynda, my mate, my Luna-to-be." The words dropped like thunder. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the whispers resumed, sharper, faster, like a storm of buzzing insects. "A Luna? An Omega as queen? The king mocks us." But Elijah did not flinch. He stood tall, his gaze sweeping the crowd, daring anyone to speak their defiance out loud. No one did. The golden-haired woman recovered swiftly, her smile tightening. "Of course. If that is your will, then who are we to question the moon goddess's wisdom?" Her tone dripped with honey, but her eyes blazed with fire. Lynda felt her knees weaken under the weight of that gaze. Whoever this woman was, she was not merely another courtier. She was a rival, and one who would not yield easily. Inside, the palace dazzled her senses. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught the light like fallen stars. Tapestries lined the walls, each one woven with the victories of Lycan's past. Battles won, enemies crushed, kingdoms bent to their knees. Every inch of this place screamed of power, and every step she took made her feel smaller. Elijah guided her into a chamber vast enough to swallow her entire village. Marble pillars soared high, their tops lost in shadows. A long table carved from obsidian stretched across the center, gleaming black under the torches. Here there were no whispers, only the suffocating weight of silence between them. Elijah turned to her, his eyes unreadable. "You felt their judgment." It was not a question. Lynda clenched her fists. "They despise me. They don't even try to hide it." "They will test you," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "And I will test you as well." Her breath caught. "You? Why?" "Because a Luna is not made by words alone. Every noble, every rival, every enemy will try to break you. If you cannot withstand them, if you falter, they will devour you." His words rang like prophecy, heavy and undeniable. She wanted to scream that she was not ready, that she had never asked for this, that she was just a wolfless girl who had already been broken 3 times over. But when she opened her mouth, the words died. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "And if I fail?" His gaze locked onto hers, unflinching. "Then they will answer to me." The vows struck something deep inside her, something tangled between fear and longing. He spoke not as a man offering comfort, but as a king laying down law. Yet the promise in his tone made her heart tremble. For the first time, she realized her battle was not only for survival, it was for the right to stand beside him as an equal, to prove to the entire court that she was more than what they called her. And somewhere in the crowd beyond these walls, she knew the golden-haired woman, whoever she truly was, waited like a wolf, circling prey.
The grand halls of the Lycan King's palace always seemed too large for Lynda. Every step echoed, as if the walls themselves whispered her inadequacy back at her. Since Elijah had brought her here, the air was thick with silent judgment. Nobles in jeweled cloaks glanced at her, their eyes sharp as daggers, their lips curling in disdain. They didn't need to speak aloud. Their message was written in every sneer, every dismissive bow. "You don't belong here." At night when the palace was quiet, Lynda sat by the tall, arched window in her chambers, her knees drawn to her chest. The moonlight silvered her skin, softening the pain on her face, but inside she was unraveling. 3 rejections, 3 public humiliations. The mate bond meant to crown her destiny had become her curse. Now, even though the Lycan King himself had claimed her, she felt like nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "Why me?" the question gnawed at her. Elijah could have chosen anyone. Seraphina, the elegant wolf with noble blood, would have fit perfectly into the palace. Yet he had stepped forward, declaring Lynda as his Luna, before the entire realm. The memory of his voice still thundered in her ears, commanding, absolute, final. But the echoes of laughter from her past, pack members mocking her as wolfless, were louder. She was terrified she would fail him. Worse, terrified she would fail herself. The next morning, when the heavy oak doors of the training courtyard groaned open, she froze at the sight of Elijah waiting there. He stood at the center, a practice blade in his hand, his tunic loose enough to reveal the ripple of muscle across his arms. His presence filled the space, larger than life, more dangerous than any wolf she had ever known. "You're late," he said, his voice steady, unreadable. Lynda swallowed hard, clutching the edge of her cloak. "I didn't know," her words faltered. "I didn't know I was expected here." His golden eyes pinned her, sharp but not unkind. "You're my Luna. You will not cower in corners. You will stand, and for that you must be trained." The declaration struck her like a challenge. Her pulse hammered as he tossed the wooden blade toward her. She fumbled but caught it, the weight strange in her hands. "I don't know how to fight," she admitted. "Then you'll learn." His tone brooked no argument. The first strike came without warning. Elijah's blade clashed against hers, sending shocks through her arms. She stumbled back, nearly dropping her weapon. "Again," he commanded. The session became a storm. Strike after strike, he pressed her, demanding she rise to each blow. Her breath came ragged, sweat beading her brow. Fear clawed at her chest with every movement, fear of failing him, of collapsing under his gaze, of proving the whispers right. "I can't," she gasped, at last, the blade trembling in her grip. "I'm not strong enough. I was never—" "Enough?" His voice cut through her despair. He stepped closer, so close she could see the wild fire in his eyes. "Do not tell me what you are not. Show me what you are." The words burned inside her, awakening something long buried. Rage, sorrow, defiance, they surged like a tide. She raised her blade again, not because she believed she could win, but because she refused to fall. This time, when he struck, she met his blow with a cry that startled even herself. Elijah's lips curved into the faintest smile. By the time he called the session to an end, her arms ached, her body screamed, and yet her spirit pulsed with something new, a spark. Later that night, alone once more in her chambers, she stared into the mirror. Her reflection was the same, dark hair, tired eyes, the girl who had been rejected 3 times. Yet behind those eyes she glimpsed something else, strength. Her chest rose with a steady breath, no more breaking, no more crumbling beneath their words. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, whispering into her own reflection, "I am the Luna of the Lycan King. I will not fail." The words tasted foreign but powerful. For the first time in years, she did not feel like prey. For the first time, she felt the beginning of what she could become. And though shadows of betrayal lingered just beyond the horizon, Lynda's vow ignited a fire no scorn could extinguish.
The palace always hummed with whispers. Servants carried trays with lowered gazes. Nobles swept through the marble halls draped in finery. Yet, beneath the elegance, something sinister stirred. Lynda felt it like a cold draft under the door, hidden, constant, waiting. The longer she lived under Elijah's roof, the more she noticed the subtle shifts in conversation when she entered a room. Courtiers would pause mid-laugh, their eyes sliding toward her with veiled contempt, before turning their voices to hushed tones. Their distrust was no longer only about her origins, it was about the power she represented. The Luna of the Lycan King was no small title, and even if she didn't yet wear the crown, her presence altered the balance of courtly games. At a feast one evening, Lynda caught sight of a cluster of nobles gathered at the far end of the hall.
Their jeweled goblets gleamed in the candlelight, their faces half hidden by the shadows cast from a golden chandelier. Among them stood Lord Darius, his sharp features severe, his words smooth like poison as he leaned close to another lord. She couldn't hear their whispers, but the way their eyes flicked to her before turning back told her everything. Rebellion. Later that night, Elijah confirmed what her heart already knew. "They test me," he said, his voice low as he sat by the fire in his private chambers. His golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "The nobles question my choice, but more than that, they sense weakness, and weakness breeds ambition." Lynda shifted uneasily. "They mean to move against you?" "Perhaps not openly, not yet, but whispers can sharpen into blades if ignored." The weight of his words settled on her chest. Elijah was the most powerful Lycan alive, yet even he was not untouchable. Power drew envy as surely as blood drew wolves. Unseen in the shadows of the court, another force stirred. The Bloodfang pack, rivals to Elijah's reign for generations, watched and waited. Deep in the mountain stronghold where their banner of crimson fangs fluttered against the wind, their alpha, Veyron, leaned over a rough-hewn table scattered with maps. "The king weakens himself," Veyron growled, his deep voice echoing in the stone chamber. "A rejected Omega as Luna, an insult to every pack in the realm. The court festers with unrest. Now is our chance." Around him, his lieutenants nodded, eyes gleaming with hunger. The Bloodfang wolves thrived on chaos, and Elijah's choice had given them a weapon sharper than steel: scandal. Veyron's beta, a scarred wolf named Garrick, tapped a dagger against the map. "Strike where he is blind, not against him, but against her. She is the crack in his armor." Murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. Plans took shape. Plans of ambush, of fire, of blood spilled under the pale light of the moon. Back in the palace, Lynda felt the tension even before the strike came. She couldn't explain how, but every instinct screamed at her in warning. When she walked the gardens alone at twilight, the hairs on her arms lifted as though unseen eyes tracked her every move. When she returned to her chambers, she found her door slightly ajar, though she swore she had closed it. And then, it happened. The night was unusually quiet, the moon veiled behind thick clouds. Lynda had just extinguished her candle when the silence shattered. Windows burst open with a crash, and dark figures spilled into her chamber. Wolves cloaked in Bloodfang colors, their teeth bared, blades glinting in the moonlight. Lynda's heart slammed in her chest. She staggered back, breath catching. There were 4 of them, maybe more beyond the window. For a heartbeat, fear froze her in place, dragging her back to every rejection, every humiliation, every voice that had told her she was weak. But then, the spark Elijah had forced into life in the training courtyard flared. She wasn't defenseless. She wouldn't be prey. She grabbed the nearest object, a silver candelabrum, and swung it with all the force her trembling arms could muster. It crashed into the first wolf's jaw, sending him reeling with a snarl. Another lunged, claws flashing, but she ducked, the blade only grazing her arm. Pain seared, but she refused to fall. The door burst open. Elijah entered like a storm unleashed, his roar shaking the walls. His eyes blazed gold, his wolf surging just beneath his skin. In a blur, he tore into the intruders, his strikes precise and merciless. The air filled with the stench of blood and the clang of steel. Within moments, the Bloodfang wolves lay broken, their bodies sprawled across the chamber floor. Elijah stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, his eyes still glowing. When he turned to Lynda, fury and fear warred in his expression. His gaze flicked to the cut on her arm, and something inside him snapped. "They dare touch you?" he growled, voice thick with wrath. "They dare use you against me?" His hands clenched into fists, his entire form trembling with the need to unleash carnage beyond these walls. Lynda, still shaking, met his gaze. She wanted to collapse into him, to let the terror consume her, but instead, she lifted her chin. Her voice was unsteady, but her words clear. They thought I was weak. They thought I would break. But I didn't. For a long moment, Elijah only stared at her, his anger slowing, reshaping. Then, for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not just protection, not just possession, respect. The Bloodfang wolves had struck and failed, but the shadows of rebellion had only just begun to spread.
The palace walls seemed taller in the days after the Bloodfang attack, their marble grandeur more suffocating than protective. Guards patrolled in tighter rotations, torches burned brighter through the night, and still Lynda could not shake the sense of eyes upon her wherever she went. The attempted assassination had left a scar deeper than the cut on her arm. It had cracked the fragile security she'd begun to build in Elijah's realm. But what unsettled her most was not the threat from enemies beyond these walls. It was the creeping fear that betrayal might come from within. Elijah's wrath had been absolute. He doubled the guard, demanded names, and launched hunts into the mountains. Yet whispers told of something darker. Spies embedded in the palace itself. Someone had let the Bloodfangs know when and where she would be alone. Someone close had opened the door. The thought gnawed at her day and night. One evening, while the court bustled with preparations for a coming feast, she found herself in the company of Mirabelle, her handmaid. Mirabelle had been assigned to Lynda the very night she arrived, a girl with warm eyes and a soft smile who always seemed to know when to bring tea or when to simply sit in silence. She'd been the first to treat Lynda with kindness in the cold halls of the Lycan King's palace. "You're restless, my lady," Mirabelle said, as she brushed out her hair, her hands gentle, her tone light. "I don't feel safe," Lynda admitted, her voice low. "I thought the danger was outside these walls, but now I'm not so sure." Mirabelle's eyes met hers in the mirror. For the briefest moment, something unreadable flickered there. Guilt? Fear? Before it smoothed back into sympathy. "You're safe with me," she whispered. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they unsettled her further. Days later, the truth shattered everything. Elijah's spy master brought him a parchment sealed with the mark of the Bloodfangs. It had been intercepted from a courier, and its contents were damning. The letter listed palace routes, guard shifts, and, most chilling of all, the precise times when Lynda was most vulnerable. At the bottom, scrawled in a hand Elijah knew too well, was the name, Mirabelle. When Elijah summoned Lynda to his council chamber, he did not speak at first. He simply handed her the parchment, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something between fury and sorrow. Her fingers trembled as she read, each word cutting deeper until the name at the bottom stole her breath. "No," she whispered. "Not Mirabelle." Elijah's voice was iron. "The proof is here. She gave them everything they needed to strike at you." Lynda shook her head, stepping back as if distance could undo the truth. "There must be some mistake. She's been with me since the beginning. She saved me in those early days. Her words cracked, faltered. "She betrayed you," Elijah said, his tone gentler now, but unyielding. "She betrayed us." The world tilted beneath her feet. Trust, fragile and rare in her life, had been a gift she offered sparingly, and Mirabelle had been the one she dared to believe in. To lose that was not just betrayal, it was devastation. That night, when guards dragged Mirabelle before them, her betrayal was confirmed in her own trembling confession. "They threatened my family," she sobbed, her knees scraping against the cold stone floor. "I never meant to hurt her, but if I refused, they would have slaughtered them all." Lynda's heart split in two, anger warred with pity, grief tangled with fury. Mirabelle had betrayed her, yes, but she had done it under duress. Could she truly condemn someone who had been forced to choose between loyalty and blood? Elijah's judgment was swift. Treason is treason. Bloodfang spared no one when they came for her. The law demands death. Her breath caught. "No."
He turned to her, his eyes hard. "You would spare the one who betrayed you, who nearly cost you your life." "She was cornered," Lynda argued, her voice trembling, yet firm. "She's guilty, yes, but killing her won't undo the damage. It will only stain us further. You are a king. Mercy is a greater show of power than execution." The chamber went silent. Even the guards shifted uneasily at her defiance. For the first time, Lynda stood between Elijah's judgment and a condemned soul, refusing to yield. It was in this crucible of betrayal that her moment of choice arrived. She could shrink back into silence, let Elijah decide, and confirm every whisper that she was too weak to stand as Luna, or she could rise, speak, act, decide, not just for herself, but for what kind of Luna she might become. Her heart pounded, but her voice steadied. "Let her live," she said, meeting Elijah's gaze without flinching. "Banish her if you must, but do not take her life. Not from me." Elijah studied her long and hard, the weight of his power pressing like a storm. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Exile, then. But her name will never again be spoken within these walls." Relief and sorrow tangled inside Lynda as Mirabelle was dragged away, weeping. The fracture of trust would never mend, but Lynda had chosen mercy over vengeance, and in that moment she felt a sliver of her own strength awaken. Elijah's eyes lingered on her, softer now. "You surprise me, Lynda," he said quietly. "Even in betrayal, you find compassion." She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I lose that, I'll be no different than those who mocked me all my life." In the silence that followed, she realized the truth. Betrayal had shattered her trust, but it had also forged her resolve. She would no longer be the girl defined by rejection. She would be the Luna who chose her own path.
The night was heavy with silence. Beyond the palace walls, the forest lay in shadow, the trees swaying like watchful sentinels. Lynda wandered the moonlit gardens, her bare feet brushing against dew-soaked grass. Sleep had abandoned her long ago. Ever since Mirabelle's betrayal, her heart carried both sorrow and an ember of something she could not name. She tilted her face toward the sky. The moon hung vast and luminous, its glow wrapping her in silver light. For as long as she could remember, that light had felt distant, unreachable. Others heard whispers of the moon goddess, felt her touch, lived by her blessings. But Lynda? She had been born wolfless, cursed, thrice rejected. To her, the moon had been nothing but a reminder of absence. Tonight was different. As the wind whispered through the branches, she felt it, subtle yet undeniable, a pulse, a hum that stirred beneath her skin, resonating with her heartbeat. Her breath caught. The hairs on her arms rose. "You are not forsaken." The words weren't spoken out loud, but they rang clear inside her mind. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the grass, pressing her palm against her chest as if to contain the sudden surge of energy there. Visions flooded her. She saw herself as a girl, mocked and ridiculed, hiding tears in the dark. She saw the sneers at the ceremonies, the laughter when rejection echoed through the halls. But then the vision shifted. She saw Elijah's golden eyes, fierce and unyielding, choosing her before the world. And behind it all, the silver light of the moon, steady, eternal. Her voice broke into the night. Why me? Why now? The wind carried the answer, soft but powerful, because only the broken know how to rise. Only the cast aside can understand the weight of the crown. Tears blurred her vision, but beneath the grief there was a fire. For the first time, she believed the moon goddess had not abandoned her. She had been preparing her. The energy surged again, stronger, and this time it burst outward. The grass around her shimmered faintly, as though bathed in starlight.
Her hands glowed with pale silver light, threads of power curling across her skin like markings of destiny. She gasped, staring in awe, but there was no fear. Her wolf had not answered in all these years, but something greater had awakened. The sound of boots against stone pulled her from the trance. Elijah emerged from the shadows, his presence as commanding as ever. Yet when his gaze fell on her, on the silver glow dancing across her skin, his eyes widened just slightly, as though even the Lycan King himself was stunned. "Lynda," he said, his voice low, reverent. She rose to her feet, trembling, her hands still alive with light. I don't know what's happening." "You're awakening," Elijah said. He stepped closer, the golden fire in his eyes catching the silver glow of hers. "The moon has not cursed you, Lynda. She has chosen you." The words hit her harder than any rejection ever had. But this time, it was not pain that followed. It was release. Her lips quivered. "But I have no wolf." Elijah shook his head. "You have something rarer. Power that doesn't come from teeth or claws, but from the goddess herself. Do you not see? You were never meant to be ordinary." The glow flickered at her fingertips, as if the light itself leaned toward his words. Lynda's heart pounded, caught between disbelief and wonder. All her life she had begged for scraps of belonging, clung to the faintest hope of worth. And now here he was, the most feared ruler alive, looking at her as if she were more than enough. Her chest tightened with emotion. "What if I can't control it?" "Then I will stand with you until you can." Elijah's hand reached for hers, his grip steady, grounding her. "You think I chose you out of pity? No, Lynda. I chose you because I saw something no one else had the courage to see, and now the goddess herself proves me right." The warmth of his hand steadied the trembling of hers. The fear that had ruled her since childhood began to loosen its grip. For a long moment they stood in silence, Elijah's strength anchoring her, the moonlight cradling them both. The silver glow finally dimmed, fading back into her skin, but its memory pulsed within her like a second heartbeat. Lynda knew she was no longer the same girl who had entered the gardens that night. Something inside had awakened, something that no rejection could kill. When Elijah finally spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you trust me, Lynda?" She swallowed, her throat tight with tears, but this time they were not from sorrow. She nodded, "Yes." And in that single word, spoken beneath the witness of the moon, the bond between them deepened into something unshakable. For the first time in her life, Lynda did not feel cursed. She felt chosen.
The palace walls trembled with the sound of chaos. The rebellion that had long whispered in the shadows had finally ignited. Torches blazed in the courtyard, the clash of steel rang through the night, and the roars of wolves in half-shift filled the air like a storm. From the balcony, Lynda's heart thundered as she took in the sight. Elijah's guards pressed against waves of attackers, their crimson banners slashed by claws and fire. And among them, she recognized the crest of her old pack, the Bloodfangs. Her breath hitched. They had come for her. The echo of betrayal still stung. Mirabelle's treachery had left her raw, uncertain of who she could trust, but now, staring at the chaos below, she knew the truth. This was no longer about her shame or her scars. This was war. The doors behind her slammed open. Elijah entered, already armored, his golden eyes burning like the sun itself. "They've breached the outer gate," he said, voice calm despite the fury around them. His gaze swept over her. "Stay inside. This is not your fight." The words stung. "Not my fight? After everything?" Lynda clenched her fists, feeling that strange silver pulse stir again beneath her skin. She shook her head. No, if they've come from me, then it's my fight more than anyone's. Elijah's jaw tightened. You're not ready. Then let me prove that I can be. Her voice cracked, but her resolute did not waver. I will not hide again, Elijah, not while others bleed. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Then, slowly, he nodded once. Not as a king commanding, but as a man accepting her choice. They descended together into the chaos. The courtyard was alive with battle, blades clashing, claws tearing, the air thick with smoke and blood. Lynda felt her knees weaken at the sight, but Elijah's hand on her shoulder steadied her. And then the moment came. A blood-fang warrior broke through the line, lunging toward her with a snarl. Instinct screamed for her to run, but instead she lifted her hand. Silver light burst from her palm, striking the wolf mid-leap. He crashed backward with a howl, his body writhing as the glow seared through him. Gasps erupted around them. Lynda stared at her hand, trembling. The glow flickered again, this time brighter. She could feel it now, not wild, but alive, responding to her will. Good. Elijah's voice rang beside her, sharp as steel. Again! The battle surged around them. Together they fought, not as king and burden, but as equals. Elijah's blade flashed with brutal precision, his claws tearing through any who dared cross him. Beside him, Lynda unleashed wave after wave of silver energy, each blast scattering foes who once would have laughed at her weakness. Yet it was not easy. Each use of her power drained her, sweat soaking her brow, her body trembling from effort. At times she faltered, nearly collapsing, but Elijah was always there, shielding her, grounding her, reminding her with every glance that she was not alone. And still the bloodfangs pressed harder. Among them rose their alpha, a towering beast with eyes burning red, his gaze locked onto Lynda, filled with hatred. Thrice rejected, he snarled, voice carrying across the battlefield. You think the moon favors you? You're nothing but a cursed whore. The words cut deep, threatening to unravel her. But then she remembered the moon's whisper, the glow in her veins, the way Elijah had looked at her as though she were destiny itself. She lifted her chin, silver fire ignited across her arms. I am not cursed, she said, sturdy. Despite the battle, I am chosen. With a roar, the Bloodfang Alpha lunged. Lynda met him head-on, silver energy exploding from her in a blinding surge. The force slammed into him, driving him to his knees. Elijah was there in an instant, his blade flashing, ending the threat with a single strike. The courtyard fell silent save for the groans of the defeated. The rebels broke, scattering into the night. Victory had come, but the air was thick with the scent of blood and ash. Lynda collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving, every muscle trembling from the strain. Elijah knelt beside her, his hand steady on her back. You've done it, he said softly, not with pity, with pride. But even as triumph swelled in her chest, she knew the cost. Lives had been lost tonight. Allies had fallen. And she herself felt scarred, as if a piece of her innocence had burned away in the fire of battle. Still, when she looked into Elijah's eyes, she saw no doubt, only faith. And for the first time, she believed she had earned it.
The night air was thick with the scent of smoke and herbs, lingering from the aftermath of battle. The courtyard, which had roared with the fury of clashing steel only hours ago, now lay quiet under the soft glow of lanterns. Healers moved among the wounded, murmuring chants that mingled with the occasional groan of pain. The air was heavy with exhaustion, relief, and a strange, almost sacred tension. Lynda stood near the center, her body still marked with faint streaks of silver, a shimmer beneath her skin that refused to fade despite her efforts to wash away the blood and grime. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath trembling with adrenaline and disbelief. Around her, the surviving wolves watched, some with awe, some with suspicion, and others with quiet envy. She had faced her old pack, stood with Elijah in the heart of battle, and now she was alive. Elijah walked beside her, tall and unyielding, his golden eyes scanning the courtyard with a calm intensity that contrasted sharply with the lingering chaos. His armor bore the scratches and dents of combat, but the way he carried himself made it clear he was unshakable. Around him, the surviving warriors instinctively lowered their heads, their reverence unspoken, yet palpable. Even the wounded leaned back, eyes tracking his every movement. They moved together toward the temple square, the very air seeming to shift with their approach. Above, clouds parted as if in response to their presence, and the moon spilled down its silver light, pure and blinding. The wolves in the square fell to their knees in unison, heads bowed. Even as Elijah stood tall, he lifted his gaze to the heavens, absorbing the lunar radiance as if drawing strength directly from it. Lynda felt a pull deep within herself, an awakening she had never experienced so fully. The silver fire that had lingered in her veins surged upward, stretching to meet the moon's glow as though the celestial body itself had extended its hand. Her vision blurred, her heartbeat thundered, and she felt the whisper once more, not in words, but in certainty. Daughter of rejection, child of sorrow, you are mine. Chosen not in spite of your scars, but because of them. Tears welled in her eyes. For years she had begged the heavens for a sign, cursed her fate, and wondered if love and purpose would ever touch her. Now, under the moon's gaze, everything she had longed for settled upon her like a warm cloak. The light wrapped around her shoulders, soft yet infinitely powerful, as if the entire sky acknowledged her existence, her struggle, her strength. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A beta warrior fell forward, forehead pressed to the stone beneath him. Blessed by the moon, he breathed, voice trembling. She is truly chosen. One by one, others followed, kneeling, murmuring, some weeping as if a massive weight had lifted from their chests. Yet among them, a few lingered, arms crossed, eyes sharp with doubt. The path to full acceptance would not be instant, Lynda realized, but the beginning had come. Even the skeptics could no longer deny the change in the air.
Elijah's hand brushed lightly against her back, a grounding touch. When he spoke, his voice resonated with a mixture of reverence and warmth that made her stomach flutter. The moon has spoken, Lynda. You are not a burden. You are not a curse. You are our blessing. Her defenses shattered at the simplicity of his words. She searched his golden eyes, seeing not the calculating king who had first claimed her as Luna, but the man who had stood beside her in every terrifying moment of battle, who had steadied her trembling hands and unwavering heart alike. I don't deserve this, she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. You deserve everything, Elijah said, calm and certain, the intensity in his gaze unwavering. Every hardship you've endured, every scar you bear, every rejection you survived, it all led you here. The words sank deep into her chest, unrelenting and true. She had spent so long doubting herself, believing that every failure defined her, that every cruel glance from the Bloodfang pack confirmed her worthlessness. But now, Under the moon's blessing and Elijah's unwavering gaze, she realized that her scars were not chains, they were proof of endurance, strength, and survival. Her voice shook, yet carried across the quiet square. Elijah, I tried to bury it, but I cannot anymore. I love you. I have loved you through every fear, every doubt, every night I thought I was alone. For a long heartbeat, silence held them, thick with anticipation. Then Elijah stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her face, his thumbs brushing away the stray tears that streaked her cheeks. His lips curved in the faintest, most tender smile she had ever seen. "And I," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, "have loved you from the moment you stood unbroken in your rejection. I only waited for you to see it, to believe it yourself. I have waited for you to claim it as truth." The crowd inhaled audibly, shocked by the openness, the raw honesty, and then the moon's light intensified, cascading over them both as if approving, blessing, and sealing their union. It was no longer just her blessing, nor his crown. It was their destiny intertwined, chosen not by circumstance, but by the heavens themselves. Wolves around them bowed, some reluctantly, some with full hearts, acknowledging the undeniable truth of her rise. The few skeptics at the edges could not hide the awe in their eyes, even as hesitation lingered. For the first time in her life, Lynda did not feel small. She did not feel unwanted. She did not feel cursed. She felt whole, complete, chosen, loved. And as she pressed closer to Elijah, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her hand, she knew that every trial, every rejection, every fear had led to this moment, her coronation of heart and soul under the eternal witness of the moon.
The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and pine from the surrounding forests. The battle-scarred courtyard, now repaired and cleansed, glimmered under the first rays of sunlight. Banners of Elijah's reign hung proudly, each embroidered with the symbol of the moon and wolf, marking a new era. The Bloodfang pack, the nobles and allied clans gathered, their murmurs of curiosity and reverence rippling through the assembled crowd. Lynda stood at the top of the steps leading to the ceremonial dais, her gown flowing like liquid silver in the early light. For years she had walked the path of ridicule and rejection, forced to endure the harsh judgment of her pack and the cold indifference of fate. Yet here she was, no longer the thrice rejected Omega who had once cowered beneath scornful eyes. She was poised, strong, and radiant, her presence commanding attention even without a crown. Elijah appeared at her side, regal yet approachable, his golden eyes scanning the crowd. In his gaze she saw pride, protection, and a tenderness reserved only for her. Though many had doubted her, whispered of her inadequacy, and plotted against her rise, they could no longer deny what destiny had chosen. The High Alpha stepped forward, an ornate silver crown held reverently in his hands. The murmurs fell to silence as he addressed the assembly. By the decree of the moon, and in recognition of valor, loyalty, and the courage of heart, we present the crown of Luna to Lynda of the Bloodfang pack. May her reign be just, wise, and guided by the light of the moon. Time seemed to slow as Elijah lifted the crown, placing it gently upon Lynda's head. The weight was more than metal. It was a testament to her journey, her endurance, and the strength she had unearthed in herself. As the circlet settled, a wave of shimmering light radiated from her, subtle at first, then glowing brighter as the moon, high and luminous in the sky, seemed to lean closer, its silver rays embracing her like a celestial embrace. Gasps of awe swept through the crowd. The skeptics, the rivals, the nobles who had once doubted her, now fell silent, witnessing the undeniable blessing of the moon upon her. Wolves who had scorned her in the past now bowed instinctively, acknowledging the rise of their new Luna. Even the distant mountains seemed to echo the energy, carrying a resonance of reverence and power that left no room for doubt. Elijah took her hand in his grip firm and grounding. You have walked through fire and shadow, faced rejection and betrayal, and yet you stand here unbroken. You are more than Luna, you are legend. Lynda's eyes glistened as she turned to face him fully. For the first time in her life, she could meet the gaze of the world without fear. I am only here because of you, she whispered, voice carrying both gratitude and love. Because you saw me when no one else would. Because you believed in me when I could not believe in myself. He smiled, a rare softness in his usually commanding expression. I saw you, Lynda, not as a cursed Omega, not as a victim, but as the woman who would rise above it all. You were always meant to claim your place beside me, not by pity, but because the moon itself called you. The moon's glow intensified, casting a radiant silver halo around them. For a moment, the entire assembly felt the celestial blessing wash over them, the energy of prophecy fulfilled, the promise of a future forged through trials, love, and unyielding courage. As the day progressed, ceremonies continued. Alliances were renewed, bonds of loyalty sworn, and the Bloodfang pack witnessed their Luna Queen in all her strength. Children looked up at her with awe, warriors with respect, and nobles with tentative admiration. Lynda moved through the crowd with grace, her hand always in Elijah's, yet her head held high, embodying the transformation that had taken years of pain, struggle, and resilience to achieve. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Elijah and Lynda stood together before the central dais, the moon above lending its eternal witness. Today, Elijah proclaimed, we honor not only a crown, but the journey that led us here. We honor strength born from trials, love born from patience, and destiny fulfilled by those brave enough to claim it. Lynda felt the weight of all those words settle in her chest, not as pressure, but as confirmation. She had been rejected, scorned, and underestimated, yet she had endured. She had risen from ashes, and in doing so, had become more than anyone could have imagined. She was Luna. She was chosen. She was legend. And for the first time, she allowed herself to smile fully, without hesitation, without doubt. For Lynda of the Bloodfang pack, the thrice rejected Omega, had finally claimed her place, not just at Elijah's side, but in the heart of every wolf who would follow her. The moon's light bathed them, unwavering, eternal, and beneath it, the Luna and the Lycan King stood together, united, revered, and unstoppable.
And that was the journey of Lynda, the thrice-rejected Omega who rose to claim her place as Luna Queen beside Elijah, the Lycan King. If you loved this story of heartbreak, courage, and forbidden love, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more epic werewolf romances, and share your favorite moment in the comments below. Don't miss the next tale where destiny, passion, and the moon's blessing collide.